So last time we dealt with the aims of education, aims of Buddhist education. So first we saw to follow the moral values, okay, of the Buddhist religion, which included compassion, mindfulness, not to cause harm, etc. Then you had to adopt good conduct and non-violence, which have behaviors of virtues of good behavior, non-violence, encouraging students to live peaceful lives. Then you have to achieve the final goal of Nirvana, the ultimate aim. Then was to propagate the Buddhist religion with its principles plus practices. Then you also had to eradicate the Vedic karma kanda or ritualism. Today let's take a look at the remaining aims of Buddhist education. So one is to give up the caste system. So in this, as you know, in those days the caste system was very much prevalent, okay, and very strong. And in this way, as a result of it, many of them were not given opportunities for education. So therefore, he wanted to abandon the caste system and also advocated for equality and the inherent worth of all individuals. Okay, so irrespective of their social standing, all of them should get an equal opportunity to get a proper or a basic education. Another aim of the Buddhist education system was to take the teachings of Buddhism to the masses. And therefore we see that efforts were made to make sure the teachings reach the common people or the common man. And therefore to spread or to make the teachings widespread was one of another aim of Buddhist education system. So then another aim was to leave yajna and sacrifices for achieving knowledge. So therefore it discouraged ritual sacrifices and instead it promoted personal insight as well as an ethical living. Next, to provide education in the language of the masses. Okay, so therefore, in a language that is easily accessible to the people. And therefore, we see that there is a lot of stress on education in the vernacular, okay, or education in the mother tongue of the people, so that knowledge can be spread more easily. Okay, and therefore we see that when the education is in the language of the masses, okay, in the vernacular languages, we see that it allows for more participation plus understanding. So therefore, doing or studying in the context, studying in the language of that particular area is also very important, and therefore the Buddhist education system recognized that, and therefore it tried to provide education in the Pali language. Then we see that the whole aim was progress and development of society. Now earlier on we see that education was restricted only to a few, right? Who were those few? The Brahmins or those in the upper caste. And as a result of it, we see that the others, not being aware of their rights, not being aware of certain things, because they were not educated, they were not able to move up in life. So therefore, as a result of it, you had the progress and development of the society being affected. So when the Buddhist education system emphasizes overall progress of the society, it means that the individual is transcended. That means more aim is given for everybody rather than just privileging a few in the society. And therefore students were encouraged to work for communal harmony as well as social development. And therefore they wanted to provide education through a new system that was initiated by the Buddha. And what was this new system? Well, it emphasized practical learning, ethical living, as well as personal development. Okay, so these were how it tried to, in a way, revamp the existing system or introduce some change in the already existing system. Focus on practical learning, ethical living, as well as personal development. So this is basically some of the aims that the Buddhist education system had at that time. So next we can move on to certain principles which were there behind the Buddhist education system. So first and foremost was the removal of ignorance. Now we see that this removal of ignorance is also part of the 12 elements, right? There are the 12 elements, right, of the 12 chain, okay, of the principle of conditioned co-production. So where does ignorance come in that? The topmost, okay. So ignorance is the first element, okay, in that chain of conditioned co-production, or also what we call as the dependent origination. Now we see that Buddha realized for himself as well as taught others that ignorance is the root of what? Suffering. And therefore it should be removed. And how can we remove ignorance? Through education. And therefore, the aim was, or the principle behind education was, to remove ignorance through education, which will lead the people to enlightenment. So, for example, through the teachings of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, the students would get a deeper understanding of the nature of suffering, also the means to overcome it, and thereby it would reduce their ignorance. Now, next it is said that another principle was that the education should be provided in peaceful surroundings. Okay, like for example, you had Buddhist monasteries, okay, you had the viharas, okay, and other organized educational institutions rather than the gurukulas. So, and therefore, the whole aim was to have a kind of a serene, contemplative environment. And when we look at the whole methodology or the whole curriculum, we will realize why this education in peaceful surrounding was important. So, another reason also is because of the tranquil nature of these places. Okay, and it was conducive for meditation, it was conducive to study, and there were less distractions. Okay, and all this would help the students to focus on spiritual as well as intellectual growth. Next, we see that education should be in the democratic atmosphere. So, we see that the Buddha wanted that the education should be in such an environment where students can freely express themselves. Okay, they can express their thoughts, they can ask questions, have discussions, and also engage in debates and discussions. And the whole aim was that all can participate. And we see that the reason for this is because this kind of a democratic atmosphere also promotes critical thinking and mutual respect. Now, if you go in the life of the Buddha, we see that during the formation of the Sangha, there were some disciples who were slightly astray, right? Okay, some who were causing division. Can you name one of them? No, that is not the schools, but just as the Sangh was formed, okay, there was somebody who in a way had a kind of a rivalry with him, right? Within, somebody who wanted to become the successor. Somebody like Devdatta. Does that character come to the mind? So we see that this Devadatta was wanting to become the successor. As the Buddha was getting older, he suggested to the Buddha, you organize or you nominate a successor. But the Buddha said that he will not nominate a successor after him, but the Sangha themselves will elect a new successor based on the principles of the Vinaya and the Dhamma. And then you have the whole story how this Devdatta gets very much annoyed, okay, and decides to take revenge, and he plots to kill the Buddha. So there were 3 failed attempts. One was he hired some assassins to kill the Buddha, but when they reached over there, they were so much touched by his calm nature that they got converted. Next, it is said that he tried to throw a stone on the big boulder on the path where the Buddha was going, but as the boulder reached the Buddha, it disintegrated into pieces. Only a small piece touched him, they say. And the third attempt, which was failed, was he tried to send a very angry elephant or a very wild elephant in order to run through him. But we see that again the elephant, on reaching the Buddha, became very calm. Okay, and finally it is said that because of his karma, okay, he got ill and died after a few months. So this is the story of Devdatta. So the whole aim was that even in his running of the Sangha, Buddha wanted a democratic way of going about, and this is also reflected in his education system. So now, another point was things of luxury must be prohibited to students. Okay, that means one of the main reasons for this was that these luxurious items would be a kind of a distraction. Okay, and this would hinder their spiritual and intellectual growth. Okay, so in today's world, now would you agree with this? Okay, let's put this question. Do you agree that things of luxury should be prohibited? What do we define as luxury? Okay, in today's world, when it comes to the student part of it, what can we kind of categorize as luxury? Okay, latest gadgets maybe. Anything else? Okay, we may have various this thing, but then how many of you all feel that it is a distraction? How many of you all feel that, okay, whatever gadgets we have, maybe laptop or tablets, phones, etc., or even some other aids of luxury, do you think it is a distraction or is it an aid? How many of you all feel it's a distraction? Okay, so we see that most of us are of the opinion that, of course, these are there in order to, as a means for growth, etc. But again, depends from person to person. So obviously, the understanding earlier was that the focus was on simplicity. Because the luxurious items could in a way lead the students astray. And therefore we see that the monastic life also, we have to understand the surroundings also. Okay, so education was in the monastery life, which was simplistic, minimalist living, and students at that time were to wear simple robes, eat modest meals, and avoid indulgences. Why? Because all this would allow them to focus on their studies. Okay, so then we also see that certain commandments were also framed. Okay, so for admission, there were some new rituals which were there, or there were also some kind of commandments for the new entrants. So you had the Pabaja ceremony, and this marked the initiation into monastic life. So along with this, what was laid out was, you had some rules, okay, you had some commandments, and all this was to guide the students in their conduct as well as studies. So here we see that in this ceremony, vows were taken by the students to uphold ethical conduct, practice meditation, follow the teachings of the Buddha, and commit to a disciplined journey for 12 years. Okay, so then later on, at the age of 20, another ritual called as the Upasampada. So this ritual was performed to gain entry into higher education. And therefore this signified deeper spiritual practice as well as additional rules and responsibilities. So in other words, this was a kind of an advanced stage of education. So what was included here was profound meditation practices. You had in-depth scriptural studies, and of course you had greater responsibilities within the monastic community. Okay, so this is with regards to the aims and the principles behind the Buddhist education system. So next time we'll take a look at their education system, which is two tier. You had elementary education as well as higher education. We'll take a look at what subjects were taught, how was the teacher-student relationship, and finally a few implications of the education system or of the Buddhist philosophy. Okay, so thank you.